All right, so announcements. We have two more meetings after tonight. We have dues are now $25. Tracy, if you want to continue more on that.
Yeah, so dues are $25 now instead of 20. If you still need to set up a payment plan or pay me in cash instead of using the Venmo, you can do that. Just email me. And then the fundraiser's going pretty well so far. Please keep fundraising. That goes until October 28th. And we've raised a grand total of, hold on just a second, $168.53 right now. So keep it up. Thanks.
Keep selling the coffee. It's gonna, since we only have a week left. I know I have to buy some stuff, and there's one other thing. We're gonna make a NAFME group chat later this evening and or tomorrow. So if you have the phone number of anybody else who needs to be added to the group chat, and if I forget people, it's probably because their phone number is not in the Google form. So if you could just add them, please. And I believe that's everything. So without further ado, Sarah, if you'd like to go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah. I use they, them pronouns. Let's see, Maddie and William, hi, sent me a message to come talk with y'all. I put together a short PowerPoint, that's how old I am, Google Slides. I was going to share that, talk a little bit about my experience, both as, you know, a queer kid growing up in school, and possibly as an example of sort of my lack of support and lack of representation, and then maybe ways that that can be changed and made different for the future. And then my hope is to not ramble on too long. My students know that I'm a good talker. And if you have any questions, maybe we can kind of discuss that. I haven't actually talked to a group of college aged folks before. So this is a little out of my wheelhouse. I'm used to talking to 11 and 12-year-olds. So yeah, so apologies ahead of time for any bad jokes that I may make. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started and share my presentation. I've also never done a presentation on Zoom. There we go. Okay, so I'm sort of putting this out from the perspective of inclusion and representation as a matter of safety for students' mental and physical health. That's little me. So maybe why, who am I and what is my perspective? And again, my goal with kind of talking about this is to maybe highlight ways that there was a lack of representation and a lack of support for me as a young kid. And I think that you will likely have perspectives on how that's changing. So I'm a queer non-binary person. I teach middle school orchestra here in Texas, North Texas. This is my 13th year teaching. In school, I struggled both academically and behaviorally because there wasn't really a lot of support. I wasn't really able to be open about how I identified, and I got bullied a lot. My gender identity has really stayed pretty similar to when I was a kid, but language has evolved quite a bit. And even now, my identity and the way that I prefer to be referred to is evolving and changing. I think I've been using they, them pronouns for just a couple of years now. So because of the bullying I experienced and the lack of support, I had a lot of fear and otherness that I expressed through anger and was kind of considered a problem child, and had many a trip to the office to speak with administrators. I was forbidden from hanging out with certain friends as a kid, both because, you know, I was gender nonconforming, and because of some of those anger experiences. But I also realized that if I got in trouble, I would be able to um, have the attention of an adult who would treat me with a degree of humanity. And so staff members and school personnel became a refuge for me. And that extended to cafeteria workers, custodians, librarians, school nurse, things like that. Um, Experiences of internalized homophobia, and even as a means of trying to fit in, joining in on discriminatory speaking and things of that nature as a kid. That was sort of the desperation to try to fit in and be included. So this led to teachers getting involved, getting me involved in programs. There was one particularly called Impact Pals, where as a third or fourth grader, I was pulled out of class to go and read to younger students. And I remember that giving me the feeling of, you know, I get to do something that no one else gets to do. I get to go and help. And I think that they fostered my natural tendencies towards wanting to help other people. And music became an outlet, as I'm sure is the experience for many of us. And it gave me confidence. And then those two things merged right around high school, to where I started to participate in various teaching activities, camps, and things like that. But while fine arts generally are more open-minded and more open and accepting of all types of people, teaching is still a field that's pretty conservative, at least from my perspective. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that from, you know, the perspective of younger people. Even when I was in college, you know, 14, 15 years ago, professors were still very conservative. My string ed professor actually recommended that everyone have a mandatory 2-year military sentence to teach discipline. So it's a little bit different than maybe things are now. And so representation plays a big role in education, because what I've experienced is that the diversity of student populations tend to be greater than the diversity of teaching staff. I was just talking to a colleague a couple days ago about when I was growing up, it was almost exclusively white women teaching. And it wasn't until middle school and into high school that I even had a male teacher, let alone a teacher of color. So, but the student body is usually much more diverse. So I think representation and making that a safe place for all students is really important, because teachers are advocates for all students. And as I said, it's a matter of health and safety. Representation humanizes our differences, and that's kind of what connects us, is this humanity that we all have, as opposed to the things that make us different. Maddie had asked about creating inclusive classrooms. I find that for me, I've become more open as an individual with my students as time has gone on, as I've kind of gotten a little more comfortable just in myself as an adult. But you should do that to the degree that you feel safe to do so, and not feel pressure to go on beyond where you feel comfortable. I wasn't out at work for the majority of my career. I had a really interesting experience. I'm not sure what it's called in where you all have come from, but our yearly orchestra contest down here in Texas is called UIL. And I remember we had a UIL contest one year, and I had a parent volunteer that was going to go with us to the contest as a chaperone. And I had ordered lunch for my students. They were eating in the classroom, and I was in my office, double checking, triple checking my lists and things like that. And the parent was in the office with me and goes, "So do you have a girlfriend?" And I was like, sort of frozen, didn't know, it was like, she started with girlfriend, this means something, and it was sort of this moment of like, I thought that I had been passing all this time as a, straight person or something other than, my this that you see here today. And so I kind of realized that, I just being myself, was obviously queer, obviously someone that's not a just cis het person. And so talking to her and realizing where I am down here in Texas, I'm in Denton, which is North Texas, and it's a pretty open community. There's 2 colleges. It's just north of Dallas. So it's a little sort of bubble of, a little bubble of, Democrats and, as I said, with the college towns, you've got people that identify lots of different ways, lots of diversity. So I felt more comfortable to come out and be a little bit more myself. One thing that I've started doing this year that's been a little bit newer is asking students how they identify. It's, for a while, you would sort of ask a student, do you have a nickname? Do you have another name that you go by? And that didn't necessarily seem initially like that big of a deal. But then as it's sort of become more widely known that folks sometimes identify with a different name than, what's on their birth certificate or different pronouns, it's becoming more widely accepted to ask that. So this is the first year that I've asked students on our student information form what pronouns they prefer. It can be a teachable moment. Some students don't know what pronouns are, even in middle school. And, so talking to them about, what does that mean? Why am I asking? And I think to a certain extent, depending on the age range, it might be important to kind of limit those options. I left it as a short answer, and I had a lot of students that entered, their name, or they entered like an animal or something that was not, the pronoun that they identify with. So, possibly having that be limited depending on the age group. And then, as you can see kind of in my my name here on Zoom, I've added my pronouns and, email signatures and things like that to make that more available and make it a safe space for someone who maybe feels slightly afraid to speak about their pronouns or talk about that. I have found that using singular they or gender neutral pronouns in regular vocabulary, not just referring to someone who uses they them pronouns or gender neutral pronouns, especially in teaching, you can say, well, this student said yada yada, and that student said this as a response, or this person responded to my question by answering this. Kind of opens it up a little bit to where it's part of the vocabulary, even if you're not necessarily referring to a specific student who uses gender neutral pronouns. And then diversifying content that you put out. people of color as composers, performance examples, and various things like that. Queer performers, and just really diversifying that, because, I know growing up for me, it was sort of the old white dudes, that we performed almost exclusively, and, just didn't really experience that diversity and inclusiveness in the content that was shared with us. So I haven't experienced a whole lot of negativity in the classroom, specifically with regard to, negative language that's used or put downs and things like that. I feel like at my school, my room is sort of a bubble of inclusiveness and positivity, and it's probably just because of the person that I am, and the way that I show up to work and sort of things like that. But I'm on my school is the oldest campus in Denton, and so we've got lots of different buildings that have sort of been added to the campus instead of when schools are built now, kind of being one big building. And so the auditorium is in another building down the hill. And when we have performances, we have rehearsals in the auditorium space the week leading up to a performance. And I often find that the way that students act, specifically eighth graders, but all students, it's a little more fast and loose in other parts of the campus. So I do hear a lot more, derogatory terms being used, disrespect and things like that. And what I've found over the course of teaching is that a lot of times, if you make it a teachable moment, or if you try to kind of understand where this student is coming from, rather than just reacting and not reacting with more negativity, you can make it a teachable moment. So instead of just shutting them down, maybe ask them a question about, one that comes up a lot is students saying, "Oh, that's so gay," and asking the student, "Well, what's gay about the way that they just reacted?" Or what's, what do you mean by that? And having them really think about it and try to come up with an answer. A lot of times they don't have a good answer, because that's not what they meant. They meant that it's stupid. And, even following that up with going, well, why do you think that those mean the same thing? And really, investigating that a little bit. Again, it just allows that person to kind of think through it on their own when maybe they haven't had the opportunity to do so. And again, as I said, when I was a kid, sometimes joining in that type of language, not realizing, that I was, participating in something that was also harming me. Asking also, what's the root of the negative attitude, or what's the root of the comment? Again, I teach at a low socioeconomic school. So a lot of times, this student might be in a bad mood because their parents were working all night and they had to take care of a younger sibling. Maybe they haven't eaten that day. Maybe they don't have the materials that they need. Someone else drove them to school. They were late and had to run to school, so there's a lot of other things that are going on that we're, as teachers, not really aware of necessarily. And I think taking a beat before reacting to those things allows for those moments to become teachable moments. Getting counselors involved. I know last year, a particular situation where there was a trans student in choir and another student in the same choir that intentionally used other pronouns for this student. And so that student was sent down to the office and made to watch an anti-bullying, anti-discrimination video, and really talk to a counselor about, why that's not acceptable and those sorts of things. But it can't just be taught, it can't just be solved, this issue of negativity at a school, with one teacher. It has to be whole school buy-in. It has to come from the administration, because it's got to be a whole mindset. It's sort of like the way our country is right now. We've got to find a unified front to move forward, and so it's the same within a school. So kind of extra thoughts that I wanted to share. Again, this is not something that I necessarily did when I first started teaching, because I was very afraid to share too much about myself and possibly get in trouble. Protections for LGBTQ folks, discrimination in the workplace only just came about in Texas this June. That there are protections now that, I can't get fired for just being a queer person. There have been instances in districts surrounding mine where, someone might have had a photo up in their room or in their office of, themselves and their partner. And then that was, that the student went home and talked about that, and an angry parent, brought it up, and then that person was put on administrative leave, so it's not always something that I've shared about myself, but I think sharing about, sharing yourself, sharing your interests, your personality, even your moods, can really humanize you to your students. If you're having a bad day, not necessarily being ho-hum about it, but really talking to your kids and going, this weather is really making me feel kind of bummed out, or I'm really tired today. Are you guys tired because you've had, right now, this is the last week of the quarter for my school district. And, a lot of the students are feeling extremely overworked. And, my class is one of the few that's taught synchronously. Many of their classes are asynchronous, so they're just getting content pushed out through Canvas, and then they're expected to kind of get through that and, and then get assessed on it. And it's pretty challenging. So I think finding those things in common help you to connect to your kids and foster an openness in your classroom that allows your students to feel safe to be themselves. One thing that I always thought was really interesting was at the beginning of the year, there were a good 4 or 5 years where our administration asked us, they would send us a slideshow presentation template and say, fill it in, and for open house, you're going to go through that for every single class. And one of the things that they were requiring us to put in there was a slide about our family, if we're married, kids, pets, those sorts of things. And, at the time, and I think still, I'm the only, kind of queer person on campus. So I would sort of get to that slide and it'd be a picture of me and my wife and, our cats. And, I'd sort of go, okay, here we are, and it was something that made me nervous, but I kind of felt like, okay, well, if they're making me do this and they're making everybody do this, it shouldn't just be, straight folks that get to put pictures up of their family in their offices and their classrooms. I'm going to do the same thing. And then if something happens, I'm going to go, why is it okay for this person and not for me? But then on the other hand, I do teach middle school, and I don't think, as I said, with the pronoun question on our information form this year, some students really appreciated that. And some students that may not be out as trans or gender nonconforming with their families were able to put their pronouns, a name that they prefer, or a name that they identify with. And other students didn't understand really what was behind all of that. So I've had students come into my office for a playing test or something like that and see a picture of my wife and I. And I had one student in particular who goes, "Is that your mom?" It's going, "No, not at all. Like we're like the same age. She's very blonde, has long blonde hair, So I think, to a certain degree, as I said, sharing that, can foster openness and things like that. But, you also have to be prepared for young students to react, and not necessarily, it always is a little bit of a surprise. So, but it's not a requirement. Don't feel pressured to follow someone else's lead. I don't think I would have gotten in trouble if I had left that slide out of the slideshow. Your safety is just as important as the safety of your students. And whether that has to do with your, sexual orientation or your gender, or your personal background, or your personal experience in the moment, you don't have to just keep up with the person next door to you or the person down the hall. Share what you feel comfortable with, and don't feel like you need to share anything that you don't feel safe to do. So that was my, all of that information. What questions do you have, or perspectives, or just anything to add? I'll let you guys kind of jump in.
I was just going to ask, how do you think that those discussions differ from like a junior high setting and a high school setting? Like, should you expect the same things? Should they look the same? Or is there like certain things that you need to take into consideration based on their age?
Discussions about...
Just about inclusivity and just bringing up the whole thing in general. Like, is there different terminology? Just kind of the whole thing in general.
Yeah. I think I'll use this year as an example for me, because this has been the first year that I've, again, put pronouns on anything. Actually just put they, them in my Zoom profile yesterday, and my sweet little varsity kids were like, do you like Miss or Mr.? And so they were very like sweetly asking me what like honorific I wanted. And I was like, well, I haven't really gotten there yet with like using mix or something like that. So I think for the younger kids, I think you can let them sort of steer it. And it's only been the last couple of years that I've had other colleagues even who have had, trans kids and things like that, where the idea of pronouns has even come up. But I think when you get into high school, you're getting more into, kids figuring out who they are a little bit, and maybe having more of a solidified identity. I think in, the younger kids, but to say that, I have a student who is trans and who has been in the news here in Denton since he was, a second or third grader, and they had like the lieutenant governor or somebody over to dinner to talk about, trans inclusion in our schools. So I think you can kind of take cues off of the students. I think, again, if you're trying to make it a safe place, if a student says, I'd really prefer it if you use these pronouns, or I would prefer to be called this name, I think then putting a blanket out of like, okay, I'm going to ask everybody what their pronouns are, and I'm going to ask everybody what name they prefer to be called, makes it a little safer for that one kid, so they don't feel, singled out. And as I said, teaching middle school, and I have some students coming in, especially this year, where, sixth graders didn't really finish fifth grade last year. So they're kind of, I call them 5 1/2 graders, maybe don't really get the pronoun thing yet. So I'm not necessarily going to put all over every document that I put out and every bulletin board, MX Bollinger, because I just don't. Then that kind of opens up a whole other conversation that hasn't begun yet. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but I think, pronouns are something that is pretty widely accepted now. Even gender neutral honorifics, there's a lot of places in Europe that use that for most things. That's an option for most things. down here in Texas, it's not. So it's a little bit, it's one of those things where maybe in a couple years that might be more widely accepted. So.
I've got a question for you.
Okay.
So who kind of like basing off of, so all of us are going to be teachers one day, and we're currently in our process of going through our undergrad and trying to figure out how we want to teach and trying to find our own teacher identities through this process. So who like helped inspire you to help you find your teacher identity?
It's a good question because I think it took me a while to get to that point. As I said, I was pretty buttoned up to begin with as a teacher. And I mean, like, I wore an ascot to my interview. Like, what's going on there? And it took me a while to realize that I was trying to be this person at school that I'm not. I'm a pretty goofy person. I like to make jokes. I do find that as a tool to connect to young kids. That especially right now when we're all wearing masks, if I can use goofy voices, and I use my expressive eyebrows and things like that, then they can kind of take a breath and relax a little bit in this situation that's kind of awkward. Maddie, I did have your mom in orchestra when I was in middle school. And she was someone who I think like opened that silliness up in me. And, in high school, my orchestra teacher, it was a little bit of the dry sense of humor. So I've got a little bit of both of those, in the sense of, silly and serious. And I think it was just, my teaching experience has been really weird. When I first started, I was really afraid of just getting fired. I was on a probationary contract, as everybody was at the time. And after 3 years, you get put on a continuing contract. And I was getting a lot of pressure from the district to, score high at UIL, grow my numbers, all these things that like school districts think matter, but anybody who is an artist knows that like, those things are important. It's important to be evaluated, but that can't, one performance can't completely shape your whole school year. They don't get to see the process. So eventually I gained enough confidence slowly to go, it's also up to, our score at UIL is also up to the way a bunch of 11 and 12-year-olds decide to show up that day. And if you know any 11 and 12-year-olds, you know that it's a grab bag, it's a crapshoot. And so what I realized was that once I started to relax a little bit and be myself and be silly, the kids started connecting with it. Believe it or not, kids do call me the mean teacher. None of my kids, but like all of the other kids that see me going, put your ID on, put your mask above your nose, because I'm out in the hallway enforcing those things because other people aren't. But I know that, that silly, goofy thing is my thing. So I think, Miss Kane and Mr. Hale for sure shaped, I mean, it's the reason why I'm an orchestra teacher, and then I think just prioritizing what's important to me as a teacher has also shaped that a little bit. I don't know if I answered the question. As I said, I could talk, to a wall and be thoroughly entertained.
No,
what
you're
else?
fine.
This might be too situational for you to kind of answer, but like you said, like music is a pretty overall like accepting realm, and that's fantastic. And like a lot of kids in different communities have said, you know, the music room is my safe space. That's where I feel like I could be myself. And while that is amazing, we want them to feel safe everywhere. And so how do you go about bringing up diversity to colleagues? Because I feel like it's a lot less intimidating to talk to the kids about it than it is, you know, teachers who have been there longer than you and people who are older than you. And so, kind of like, how do you bring that up? Because if it's not being established everywhere, then it's kind of pointless because you need that security. So, I don't know if you can really answer that, but
Yeah, I think I can speak to a few things on it. My experience has been I'm the department chair for fine arts at my school, so I kind of am the first go-to person when any of the fine arts colleagues have a concern, and we've had some issues with discipline the last 5 or 6 years, and one thing that's come up is when students are disrespectful or rude to teachers. And one of the things that's come up for me in particular is, and I think this slide is on the slideshow. I'll share it with you. I might have accidentally skipped it, but I've had students call me a dyke. I've had students, when I have my, at the end of our hallway, I have like a little half of a bulletin board with my information on it. And this is going to sound really weird. I promise I'll justify it. The staff restroom is like my favorite secret place to like keep an eye on things because it's in the middle of the hallway. No one knows you're in there. And, you can hear everything that's going on around you. And so I remember I walked out of the restroom and I heard this student, go, "Ooh, is that lesbian?" And she was just talking to herself, but talking at my little corner of the bulletin board. And I was like, "Oh, well, here I am. Let's have a talk about this." And then, similarly, our choir teacher is Black, and I had a student call her a couple years ago, call her the N-word. And when we brought that to administration, when, the student called me a dyke, he said, "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" And I was like, "Literally anything, just not nothing, And, this student that called her the N-word, he said, "Well, just, don't take it personally." And I was like, tell a Black woman not to take the N-word personally, and so, my first reaction was to go to, top administration and say, we need to really talk about some training that our staff needs to go through because this is not acceptable. And if it's happening to the staff, you bet it's happening to the kids. And, beyond just these are words we don't use, it's also sensitivity training. How do we talk about pronouns? How do we talk about gender identity and sexuality? How do we talk to middle schoolers about sexuality when they don't even have health class yet, they haven't even gotten to that point. So but I think that it's challenging because it's got to come from a perspective. Again, that's why I keep using the phrase safety. If it's a safety issue, you bet that admin's going to get on board with what you're talking about. If you talk about it as an LGBTQ issue, they're going to be much less likely to want to address that as a whole staff because they won't want to bring attention to it per se. And again, I think that it also has to do with the way that you approach things. And I mean, from kind of taking a couple steps back to, what are examples of some of this where maybe you're talking to marginalized folks My favorite thing about my relationship with my choir director, she's Black, I'm a queer person. We kind of go back and forth. She's working on my pronouns, and I get a little glimpse of what experiences might be like for people of color, that an experience that I don't have as a white person. And you would see teachers that are old school who are yelling at some kid because he's got a do-rag on, and instead of being like, man, why are you wearing that, we don't wear headwear in school, it's like she's specifically calling out this person of color, and in a sort of put down kind of a way. And when I was realizing, okay, even gender stuff, it's like you're only picking on the girls who are wearing short shorts. You're not talking to, this guy who's wearing this inappropriate t-shirt, or, the boy whose pants are down to his knees, or any particular thing. It's like you're sort of, so how do we address that as a whole school? I think that it takes teachers realizing that not everybody has that perspective. And so I think if, I've stood up before in a staff meeting and have said, we're talking about dress code, and everything that's on this dress code is gendered, and generally is directed towards female students. And it's this whole idea that, it's more talked about now of like, we'll teach the boys to not be jerks. It's like, it's not her fault for wearing shorts. It's his fault for having thinking that he has, ownership over someone's, experience, So, I've stood up in meetings before and brought that up, that, stuff that we're discussing is very gendered, or stuff that we're discussing is very geared towards people of color. Again, it wasn't that they were worried about people wearing hats in school. They were specifically worried about, these 3 kids that were wearing do-rags, and so when you start to isolate those situations where, again, you're maybe discriminating versus making the school a safe zone, we don't want to wear hats because we want to make sure that your face is visible. We don't want to, we want to dress professionally so that, we're preparing you to go and be at a job interview. It's not that we're saying your shorts are too short because, you're going to make somebody think something inappropriate. It's kind of going, why are we doing this? So I think having those conversations and being willing, especially, again, if you are someone who has had privilege to some degree. So if you're a white person, if you're a, cis het person, using that privilege so that it's not people of color that have to stand up and go, the kid's got a do-rag on because he's working on his waves, that girl's wearing those shorts, or that student is wearing those shorts because it's hot outside and it's Texas and it's 104, and or the other part of that is going, is that student wearing that, or is that whatever it is because of a student's lack of resources? Maybe grandma had to pick them up today, and so they're wearing something that's 2 years old that happened to be at grandma's house, but a lot of those things don't get thought through to that extent. It's just, this is the way that we've always done it. So I think younger people like you bringing those things up and bringing it up. And I don't know if you've experienced this. When I try to talk to my dad about literally anything, but specifically things like the things that we're talking about, there's just a lot of like, if I tell him, Dad, if you vote for Trump, you're voting against my rights as a queer person. He goes, no, I'm not. And it's like, yeah, you are, And so I think if we have the experience of, if there are people, you know, and again, I'm from Missouri, but I work in Texas, so there's a lot of like the Texas conservatism that I've had to kind of learn to recognize. You know, putting it out there gently, putting it out there in a non-judgmental way. I'm not going, well, this one person is just like, you know, being, you know, such a stick in the mud about this thing that's not really that important. And again, it's a learning opportunity, even if it's for a colleague. So, like I said, to sum all of that, you know, word explosion up, the sensitivity training, I think putting that out there, and I think again, as someone with privilege, being willing to stand up and speak to it, and in a way that is a, you know, olive branch rather than a put down to someone that maybe doesn't get it. Now you're all just afraid to ask more questions because
Well,
I'm talking.
it's been McKinley and I dominating this whole discussion so far. So if anyone else has anything to add, go ahead.
How do you handle conflict with your administration without like being afraid of like losing your job and things like that?
That's a great question. The first part of that is I think that, you know, administration has different levels. The only person that has the ability to hire or fire me is the head principal. We have 2 assistant principals at my school and an administrative, what's the word? Intern. And, you know, so the assistant principal that said, you know, well, what do you want me to do about it when this kid called me a dyke? He doesn't have anything to do with my job. Additionally, as I said, when I first started, my fine arts director, which is kind of my district level, you know, person that I answer to, you know, said, well, hey, if you don't get your scores up for UIL, just, you know, just remember you're on a probationary contract. And for a long time that stuck with me. And as I've talked about that with my principal now, he goes, well, he can't fire you. I'm the only person that can do that, you know? So I think there is a little more safety in job security, I think, than is initially experienced by a young teacher. As I said, I thought I was going to get fired for the first 10 years of teaching, you know? And actually, you know, what I've realized is through just being myself, I've become an asset at my school. And I've become someone that people go to. And even now, you know, my principal came to me today and we talked about something and I said, you should send this out in an email because right now nobody knows what's going on with all the COVID stuff. We get a, you know, generic district email when a kid gets sent home and is tested positive, you know, and he went and sent an email. So it's kind of like, oh, well, even though you're my boss and even though you can technically fire me, you know, we're actually colleagues and we can work together to make this a better school experience. I think the other thing to remember is also that, like, if you're on a probationary contract, you can just get fired and not really have to be told why. If you happen to be on a continuing contract or have some kind of tenure, that you have to be put on a growth plan and have some of these things where it's like they've given you an opportunity to fix this thing. I think teaching as a field, you know, we don't have enough teachers, you know, with the COVID stuff and some of the ways that our district has dealt with it. You know, we've lost 9 teachers in the last year, you know, so I don't think that they're going to be as picky if you're somebody that happens to have like a quirky personality, or you're somebody who happens to be gay, or you're somebody who has, you know, purple hair. I mean, it's like really, truly, when I first started teaching, it was like, you do not dye your hair. Everyone has natural colored hair, you know, all this kind of stuff. And again, I teach in a little bubble of diversity, but, you know, we fully have a 6th grade teacher that has like bright purple hair, you know. And when I first started teaching, I would have thought, whoa, you know. Thank you, Kima. So and you know, so I think it's one thing to be cautious, it's another thing to be in fear for your job. And I think part of the fear, it, you know, can be quelled a little bit by building that relationship with your administration, and again, you know, showing what an asset you are. And you know, for me, my experience has just happened to be kind of slowly creeping in the, you know, I mean, I wanted to put on the slideshow, I almost did this, my first year teaching of me in like a knee-length dress for my first concert, you know, to the point where I'm at now, where, you know, I just started combing my hair back last year, was my like big, you know, gender effage, you know, like I'm gonna coif my hair, thank you. And that took me a while to kind of get to that point of feeling comfortable to really like be the person that I felt like. So it's kind of different. It's you know, it's one of those things where, you know, again, it's the privilege of being, you know, a cishet person, that she can come to school with purple hair because nobody's questioning, you know, anything else about her, you know. And then I come with, you know, my boiled wool sweater and my you know, selvage denim and my boots, and you know, I get looked at funny, and you know, that obviously questioning looking, you know, look at so it's, as I said, you know, the biggest thing is do what makes you feel safe. But I think I had so much fear when I first started teaching that I was going to lose my job. And not even because of being a queer person, just because I thought my teaching was terrible. And I just didn't need to be that scared. So, and find you a buddy. I think this was the slide that I missed. Find you a buddy at school that can be your go-to, especially if it's somebody that has taught there for longer than you. Again, my choir teacher bud, you know, it's her 25th year teaching, I think, at my school. Excuse me. She also grew up in Denton. So she experienced the whole plethora of, you know, any kind of discrimination, all the way up to being the teacher that has the trans kid, you know, and having to work on pronouns and things like that, you know. And so talking to her, there were a lot of times where she talked me off a ledge when I was really anxious about job security and about, you know, those sorts of things. And having that person on campus that it's your safe person that you can talk to, really makes things a lot easier. Is not always the easiest thing to find. My wife teaches in a more affluent district, about 30 minutes south of here, and she does not have that buddy on campus, you know, and it's a little bit of a struggle for her. But she also, you know, looks more straight, and you know, and so she doesn't kind of raise those red flags and stuff with the haircut and things of that nature. So
Okay, I've got a question for you. Is there anything your school district is doing in regards to like diversity and equity and anything like that, and addressing that? Because like my big thing is like until I came to college, like I don't think I've ever, like I can't recall having like a teacher of color or anything like that. So is there anything like your school is doing to address just, you know, um, getting the teaching field more diverse? Because like obviously the student populations are, but the workforce definitely isn't.
right, that's a great question and a great observation. I don't think that my district in particular is doing anything necessarily to diversify the teaching field and the teachers and school workers. That being said, you know, living in Texas, we have a much higher Latinx population. I would say that our staff is pretty diverse at my school in terms of, you know, ratio of people of color and, you know, white people. I think it does represent to an extent the student body, but there are also schools in more affluent corners of the district that are a lot less diverse, but it's also a lot less diverse in the student population because, you know, my school, again, is the oldest. It's right downtown. And when I say downtown, I literally mean like the square, you know. There, and folks have moved, you know, south and east, and those areas have become a lot whiter. And so both the student population and the staff have kind of matched that, you know. So and then, as I said, the schools that are more downtown tend to be a little bit more diverse. So I don't think that there are any measures in place in particular, but I don't think it's, I think, you know, as you said, there are a lot of areas where the diversity really in the teaching staff doesn't match the diversity in the student population. The district that I'm in does seem to have a little bit broader diversity. So I am fortunate in that regard.
Any other questions before we have to wrap up?
I was just about to say that. Honestly, I had a question before, but you answered it because I was going to ask about administration. So, because
And
that's
there are some, you know, again, sometimes you get lucky in the experience of, you know, having administrators that have a little bit of a broader world experience. You know, my principal is a person of color. I think all of the principals that I've had have been people of color. I have had a good handful of like big, white, loud, good old boy assistant principals. And it's harder sometimes to get the point across. Again, when I have that administrator that, and I mean, as I think about it every time I see him is, you know, well, what do you want me to do about it? You know, you know, one thing I will say, and this is sort of something that maybe my generation experienced for the first time, which is that, you know, you get into a school and you want to go and add everybody on Facebook, you know, or you want to go add everybody on social media. Be careful about that. It's okay to kind of keep your personal life to yourself, and it's okay to keep their personal life out of your purview. Again, you know, one of my assistant principals is, you know, very conservative, and while I enjoy our interactions in person, it's not the sort of situation where I want to see what she's up to on a daily basis and see who she's voting for and all that kind of stuff. And that's one of those things where I kind of go, I'm going to keep that at arm's length. I don't need to bring that in. So be cautious about what you're letting into, you know, your safe zone, and don't feel obligated, you know. Again, when we got a new fine arts director, and she added every fine arts teacher in the district on Facebook. And I just want to, you know, to an extent, I want to be able to come home and not have to be at work and not have to moderate what I'm putting out on my social media, because I know that I've got this administrator who may or may not agree with it, or, you know, something of that nature. So, you know, just be careful with that social media. aspect of it. I will say I'm super proud of all of you because, you know, when I was in college, which wasn't that long ago. I mean, 15 years ago is not that long ago. But, you know, I mean, again, my string ed professor was like, I was in the Air Force and it taught me discipline. And I'm like, isn't what we're doing teaching kids discipline, like music and, you know, being responsible and things like that? Aren't there other ways to do that? Aren't there more ways to do something than just the one right way? You know, and I think that it's awesome that you're spending your evening time, you know, wanting to investigate and learn more and broaden your experiences. And you know, that's what really makes great teachers is just the striving for more knowledge and striving for more understanding, and not just going like, I read the book, I got the degree, I got the job, and now my work is done, you know. So good on you guys. Feel free to reach out to me. Maddie's got my email address, and I'll send you all the slideshow as well, with some links. If there's any particular resources that you want, I know one resource that I've been looking for in particular and cultivating is the teacher burnout. I know you guys were talking about, some of you were talking about the feeling of being burned out as a student. I like don't remember college, so feel ya. You know, I was taking like 19 hours a semester and doing way too much, and you know, and also again, the thing that I like that you're doing is, you know, I didn't learn any of this stuff when I was, everything that I've talked about, I've learned since becoming a teacher. I didn't learn it in college. I didn't learn how to interact with kids. I didn't learn my pacing. I didn't learn, you know, as Maddie asked, like my teacher voice and my teacher personality until I got in front of kids. And I think, you know, it's great that you're already, looking for those ways of supplementing what you're getting. You know, you may be getting a much better education at KU than I did. So, but definitely reach out. As I said, I've got some resources for that kind of teacher burnout. One book is called Unshakable: How to Enjoy Teaching Every Day, No Matter What. And a lot of it is really good advice on, you know, again, just very simple things of what to do and what not to do at a school, such as, you know, the social media aspect where you're like, you know, I don't really need to be friends with my vice principal because, you know, she seems pretty not similar to me and I just don't need that in my life, you know. So I will be happy to share any of that stuff with you. Just send me follow-ups, and once you have slept and you know, maybe done some homework, I don't know, and you know, can think through any other questions, and I'd be happy to provide resources for that. So, and thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Thank you for coming to speak. And with that, have a great rest of your night, I guess. I don't really know what else to say. I don't have any. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. Bye, y'all.
Thank you for your time. Have a good night.
You too.